We all know that feeling. We're out on a wonderful ride, really enjoying ourselves. The sun's shining, and then all of a sudden we get that wobbly feeling and we realise we've got a flat. Now it might only be flat at the bottom, but you're still not going anywhere until you fix it. Of course, for most of us this is just a mere irritation and something we can easily fix if we've got the right kit. For others, it can be a catastrophic failure that ruins the day and has them calling out for help. Now, other cyclists are really helpful if they're passing you by, and I've had it on several occasions where I've just stopped for a rest and a cyclist has stopped and asked if I needed help. But of course you could be in an area like this where we're quite away from anywhere and it's not a route that many cyclists use. Now on the Tempest I'm running tubeless tyres, but as any tubeless user will know, you can still get a puncture, but you probably don't notice it. You can also get a fairly big hole, and no matter how much you try to repair it, it just won't hold. So the easiest way to get over a puncture is just change the tube. Carrying a spare tube is important, even if you're running tubeless. Once you've repaired the puncture or replace your tube or whatever you're going to do, you've then got to reinflate the tyre. And that's where disaster can also strike, because if you're like me and you stupidly rely on that little mini pump that you used to use on your road bike, then when you're running 40mm tyres on a gravel bike, you're going to have a problem. So there is another solution, and that's to use a CO2 cartridge. Now it's important to get the right CO2 cartridge for your type of tyre. This one is a 25-gram one because I'm pumping up a larger tyre. And this will inflate your tyre in the blink of an eye. Very good, but they're quite heavy. You've got obviously 25 grams of CO2 in here. You've also got the weight of the cartridge, the weight of the filler. You'd really need to carry two because you've got two wheels on your bike. Now the CO2 is a great option for those that are wanting to get on quickly. Maybe they're in a competition or whatever, then it's worth it. But there is a fair bit of weight involved and the size is fairly large. Some time ago I was asked the question by a viewer, what did I think about these mini compressors? And frankly, I'd had a look at some, and indeed I'd been offered several to review, but they were either probably a brand that I wasn't familiar with, didn't like the technology involved, or they were quite big and bulky. And as I've said before, I'll only put my name to something that I can believe in. So I decided to research the market, and one name kept coming up as the market leader, and that was Fumpa. Now Fumpa are an Australian company. They're in Melbourne, Australia, and they actually manufacture the product in Australia, which attracted me. I also discovered that they distribute within the UK, so delivery would be fast. And also if there was any problem, it meant that there was a local base that could handle that. Contacted Fumpa Pumps, told them honestly the situation. I told them I didn't want them to give me a pump. I just wanted to borrow one to make a review and to assess it and so on. Fumpa make three models. There's the workshop version. It's obviously larger and has an integral pressure gauge. There's the Fumpa Nano, which was designed as an ultra lightweight unit specifically for road bikers. And then there's the model we're reviewing here, which is the Fumpa Mini. Now when I spoke to Fumpa, quite rightly they asked me the question, what type of riding was I doing? When I explained it was a mixture of road and gravel, they suggested that I use the Fumpa Mini. The Fumpa Mini is still lightweight, but it's a high pressure unit and has a lot of capacity. And they very kindly sent me one. When the Mini Fumpa arrived, I was immediately impressed with the shape and the quality. This beautifully rounded off casing in aluminium means that this isn't going to dig in when it's in your jersey pocket. It'll handle both Presta and Schrader valves, and it's just a case of changing the small insert. And what I really like, small things, but attention to detail. They even provide a little resealable bag so that you don't lose the insert. It's fully rechargeable unit, USB-C, so it's a modern connector. They managed to make the Mini Fumpa so small because they are using a digital brushless motor. This develops a great deal more torque than a standard brushed motor. So that means they can make the motor much smaller and therefore the overall unit much smaller. And this mighty little unit is claimed to inflate to 120 psi. Now, although I'm going to test this later, I'm not going to test it to 120 psi because I don't want any explosions. One of the other features that may not be immediately obvious when you're just looking at these things online is the heat that they generate. Now, these things will get hot. The action of compressing air creates heat, and that heat can be a problem. On some of the cheaper units, it can actually burn you if you're not careful. Now, there are some units on the market that will coat the pump in silicone, and the idea is that that stops it burning you. But of course, by coating the thing in silicone, it's actually retaining heat as well, and that's probably not going to do the unit any good. What Fumpa have done is designed the casing so that it doesn't get too hot. The heat's going to be dissipated through the casing, but it never gets hot enough to cause any problem at all. I've used this now several times, not for myself thankfully, but for other people I've met on the road, and all have been impressed, and certainly from my point of view it's not caused me any discomfort whatsoever. Now, being such a small unit, there is no room in the Mini Fumpa and the Nano to fit a pressure gauge or indeed an auto cut-off. That would just make the thing bigger and heavier. But if you're really serious about wanting to know what the pressure is, Fumpa make this absolutely beautiful little pressure gauge. I mean, it's very, very lightweight. It's just not even worth weighing, and it'll fit on a key ring or onto a kit bag or whatever. And the other big benefit with this is that it's rechargeable as well. So again, just using the USB-C. And we'll have a look at this a bit later on. Now, for the purpose of this, I've let all the air out of my tyre. I haven't actually got a puncture. It's probably a foolish thing to do miles from home, but I have every confidence in the Fumpa. So let's get this tyre inflated again. Something unique with a pump of this size is that you can actually locate the filler head onto your valve before you switch on. Now, some units don't allow this, so you have to actually have the pump running before you put it onto the valve. And frankly, that's wasting valuable power. So with the Fumpa, we're just going to press the button, hold it, and up we go. Now, I'm running these front tyres at about 40 psi on the gravel bike, and I'm almost there already anyway. And turn it off, and just to prove, you know, there's absolutely no heat there that's causing me a problem. So this aluminium casing's dissipating the heat really well. I'm keeping the Mini Fumpa in my kitchen sink bar bag, and there's stacks of space, it's so small. Or indeed, you can easily slip it into your jersey pocket. And with its rounded corners and lightweight, you don't even know it's there. When weighing up the suitability of this for our style of riding, we need to consider the alternatives. Now, perhaps we're happy with a pump, and that's fine. Road racers are probably going to want to carry CO2 because it's very, very quick. And that would, I think, be the main alternative. So for that reason, I've weighed my CO2 kit. And as you can see here, a 25 gram CO2 cartridge, which I would need for my 35mm tyres, that's weighing in at 94 grams. Now, if you double that up, that's 188 grams. Then you've got the filler nozzle, which is 23 grams, so 211 grams. So let's now weigh the Fumpa. Now, on the box, it claims that this weighs 190 grams or 6.7 ounces. And on my scales, which might be a wee bit out, it's actually coming in 189 grams. You can see here that the Fumpa Mini weighs an amazing 21 grams less than my CO2 kit and is much smaller. The Nano weighs an amazing 111 grams less. But of course, bear in mind that with a road bike, you'd be using a smaller CO2 kit. However, the Nano is still lighter and smaller. Now, all this hype is one thing, but the proof of the pudding, as they say, is in the eating. So I undertook some lab testing. Well, my garden to be precise. But I tested the Fumpa Mini on 3 types of tyre. So they're my 700C 40mm gravel tyres, which are tubeless. Then my 700C 25mm Gator Skins tube tyres on the road bike. And then finally the 57mm tyres on my 29er mounted bike. One other useful point with the Fumpa is that it just pushes onto the valve as opposed to screw. And if you're familiar with tubeless, you'll know the valve core can be removed. And I've sometimes found that the action of unscrewing a filler nozzle will mean that it'll pull the valve core out if it's not tight enough. This one is tight, and it's not an issue anyway, because as I say, the Fumpa just pushes on. So we're on, tyre is flat, press the button and hold. Once it starts running, we can release. I wouldn't bother measuring the pressure if I was just repairing a puncture on the roadside. I'd just be doing it by feel. But for the purpose of this, I'm going to give you an idea of the pressure. Now, I'd be happy for anything around the 35 to 40 mark. So I'm going to turn off now. That's certainly of enough pressure for me to ride. I'm just going to check on the gauge, setting it to PSI. Press on, and it's 38, so that's absolutely perfect. So what we're going to do now is let all the air out again, and what I'm going to do is allow the Fumpa to cool down slightly, and that's because it does have a thermal cutout. Now the thermal cutout is going to protect both the pump and you. In normal use, it's unlikely the thermal protection will kick in, purely because you're only likely to be pumping up one tyre at a time, unless you're really unlucky. So anyway, we've cooled down slightly, and back on, hold the button, and away we go again. Now I'm going to do this experiment on a 700C 25mm road tyre, and also on a 57mm 29er mountain bike tyre. I'm not going to show those now because it's going to make the video too long, but at the end of this video I'll put a link to another video showing those 2 tyres being tested. So here we are, we're back up to where I would be happy riding. So again, we'll just test that pressure. That's actually 36, so I'd be happy with that. But obviously we can get more if we need it. So we'll let it down one more time, and we'll just see how much more this compressor has in it. It's certainly fulfilled its obligation by pumping up the 2 tyres as claimed. So totally flat again. Again, I'm going to let this just cool down slightly. And while I do, I'll mention a little bit more about this little pressure gauge. It actually measures in PSI kilopascals and bar. The first press of the button shows you the battery state, and then it will go to one of the measurements. And as you press the button to cycle through the pressure measurements, you'll get a little line to indicate which pressure you're measuring. So the pump has given us exactly what it said it would do, but let's see if we can actually get a third out of it. Now what I like about this is that there'll be times when I want to run these gravel tyres a bit lower. So for example, if I was on a pretty rough track, I would run them at a lower pressure. But then if I want to come back on a long road stretch, I can literally whip this pump out and pump the tyres back up to the pressure I want them. So there we go, that's a third inflation. Just check our pressure again. Now we're at 35 this time, and I'll show you something with this pressure gauge that's useful. If we wanted to say drop this to 30, all we do is move it to the side slightly, and there we go, we've dropped to 30 without taking the gauge off. Right, so we've had 3 inflations of this 40mm gravel tyre. So we're flat again. I'm just going to give the pump a few more moments to cool down. Now, as I've explained, the body of this pump doesn't get hot, just warm. But one thing on all pumps that will get hot is this nozzle. So obviously be very careful if you've been pumping a while on this, because it will get hotter. And even if it's a model where the case is enclosed in silicone, this bit won't be, and it will get hot. Okay, so it looks like we've probably cooled down enough. It's still quite warm, but we'll see how we get on. Again, tyre is totally flat. Got the nozzle on. Now it's slowing down a bit, so although the tyre's hard, I let it go until it actually stopped. Pop our pressure gauge on again. Set it to PSI. And that's actually pumped it to 30 PSI. For a 4th time. It would be very easy for Fumpa to claim that this pump will pump a tyre up 4 times, and frankly I've proven that it does. But of course they will be taking into account the fact that some people will want to pump up harder and so on. So I think their claim of pumping up 2 tyres with 1 charge is very conservative. For each batch of tyres I tested, I had to recharge in between. So I took the opportunity to even time the recharge time. And this is another example of Fumpa's conservatism, because they claim an hour to recharge, but it was actually taking 50 minutes. Now, it's not a huge amount, but at least it's inside what they're claiming. Of course, that's going to depend on the type of charger you're using and the output and so on. Somebody did comment a while ago that when I make these reviews I never talk about prices. Well, there's a very simple reason for that. One is that these prices will vary depending on the country, and of course if somebody is watching this video in 5 years' time, for example, which I hope they are, then prices will have changed. So it's just a case of go on the website and have a look. But what I would say is that Fumpa prices are not the cheapest, and I wouldn't expect them to be. You are effectively buying the Royce of cycle compressors. So it's important that when we look at pricing, we consider what goes into them, and we must remember that they are using these digital brushless motors, which means it's a much lighter unit, but it's also much more reliable. They also use the best quality lithium cells, they have the overheat protection and so on, so it's an excellent design. And that means that it's going to work when you need it. Let's face it, you're not going to use this pump unless you need it. Although at the selling price, Fumpa do represent value in my opinion, they've very kindly agreed to a 10% discount to our viewers. Now to get this, all you need to do is enter the code Roy Riding in capitals at the checkout and you should get the 10%. One thing I want to make clear is that I have no connection with Fumpa, there's no inducement. This pump is going back, so I won't even gain that. I won't earn any commissions, there's been no payment or anything, so I've effectively made this video purely to promote what I think is the best pump on the market. I think the Fumpa Mini would be ideal for e-bike users because e-bikes by their very nature they're heavier, so they do need a larger capacity tyre. I also think it would be great for wheelchair users, for example, so that they could pump up their tyres just with one hand. Well, I hope you found the video useful, and if you did, it would help me a great deal if you would just spare the time to give it a like. And also, if you know anyone that you think could benefit from this, if you'd share it with them, that would be good too. We've got lots of content coming up, including some quite special rides that we've already done. So if you'd like to see those, please subscribe and hit that bell button and you'll be informed when they come up. But whatever you use to pump up your tyres, I hope you don't have to use it very often. I wish you safe riding and hope you'll join me again in the future. Bye for now.